The wind on Cathara Prime cut through everything like frozen knives. Lee Tae-min pulled his jacket tighter as he stood with the other cadets at the base of the ice wall of torment. The massive glacier stretched up into the gray sky, so tall that clouds wrapped around its peak like a white scarf. Tae-min looked around at his fellow cadets. They came from 12 different worlds, each one representing their species in this final test. The reptilian Sorak twins, Velthoris and Zekmaya, had scales that sparkled with frost. Their long tails swept nervously across the ground as they stared up at the wall. The insect-like Chitari cadet, called Klaxon 9, clicked her mandibles, together, making sharp sounds in the cold air. Near them stood Yorgeth, the massive bear-like Ursani whose thick fur was already turning white with ice crystals. The two luminary twins, Shiara and Velenti, glowed softly blue in the dim light. Their bodies seemed to shimmer like they were not quite solid. The water being Neftali looked worried as ice began forming on her transparent skin. Commander Thulvar, their Vraxian instructor, stepped forward. His four arms moved as he spoke, pointing up at the wall. His voice boomed across the frozen ground. "Cadets of the Galactic Military Academy," he said, "before you stands the ice wall of torment. For 300 years, this wall has tested the greatest warriors from across the galaxy. Many have tried to reach the top. Most have failed." The commander's red eyes swept across the group of young aliens and the single human among them. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "The rules are simple," Thulvar continued. "You have 72 hours to reach the summit. You may use only what you carry with you now. No flying devices, no energy weapons, no advanced technology beyond basic survival gear." Taemin touched the thermos hanging from his belt. Some of the other cadets had noticed it and given him strange looks. It seemed like such a simple thing compared to their equipment. The Sorak twins carried special heating units. Klaxon 9 had brought drilling attachments for her natural mandibles. Yorgeth wore armor that could regulate his body temperature. The human had a thermos, some basic climbing gear, and a backpack full of simple supplies. "This wall has defeated champions from every species," the commander said. "The ice is harder than most metals. The cold will freeze your blood. The wind will try to tear you away. Many of you will not even attempt to climb. That is acceptable. Survival is also victory." Taemin studied the wall more carefully. It rose straight up like a smooth blue mirror. The surface looked perfect, without cracks or ledges to grab. Other cadets were already setting up their base camps, planning to wait and study the wall before attempting to climb. "The wall measures 500 meters from base to summit," Thulvar explained. "Previous records show that most successful climbs take between 40 and 60 hours. The current record is held by a Vraxian warrior who reached the top in 38 hours, though he required medical treatment afterward." The commander paused and looked directly at Taemin. "Human cadet, your species has never attempted this trial before. Your people have only recently joined the academy. Do you understand what you face?" "Yes, sir," Taemin replied. His breath made white clouds in the air as he spoke. "Very well. You may begin when ready. Emergency beacons will extract any cadet who activates them. Medical teams stand ready. This is not a death trial, but it has claimed lives before. The other cadets began making their preparations. The Sorak twins started assembling a heated shelter. They planned to study the wall for several hours before attempting to climb. Klaxon 9 began testing her drilling equipment on smaller pieces of ice. Yorgith was doing stretching exercises to keep his massive muscles warm. The Luminary twins floated slightly off the ground, trying to use their phase abilities to test the wall. They pressed their glowing hands against the ice and frowned. Something was wrong. Their powers that let them pass through most materials were not working on this strange ice. Neftali was already in trouble. The water-based alien was shivering as ice formed across her body. She activated heating pads and wrapped herself in thermal blankets, but everyone could see she was struggling. Taemin unscrewed his thermos and steam rose from the opening. He had filled it with boiling water before leaving the base. While the other cadets set up camps and tested equipment, he walked directly to the wall. "What is he doing?" Velthoris asked his sister. "The human appears to be starting immediately," Zekmaya replied. Taemin poured a small amount of hot water onto the ice wall. The water hissed and steamed, melting a small depression in the surface. He waited a moment for it to cool slightly, then gripped the handhold he had created and pulled himself up. He poured another small amount of water higher up and created another grip. The other cadets stopped their preparations to watch. This was not how anyone climbed the ice wall of torment. Warriors were supposed to use strength and endurance to overcome the challenge. They were supposed to fight against the wall with determination and willpower. The human was changing the wall itself. Is that allowed? Klaxon 9 clicked to the others. Commander Thulvar was watching with interest. He spoke into his communication device. "Monitoring station, we have an unusual approach developing. The human is using heated liquid to create handholds." A voice crackled back through the device. "Is this against regulations?" The commander thought for a moment. "The rules forbid advanced technology and energy weapons. They say nothing about using basic tools and supplies in creative ways." Taemin was already 3 meters up the wall, moving steadily. His technique was simple but effective. Pour water, let it melt the ice, wait for it to cool enough to grip safely, climb higher, repeat. Behind him, the other cadets were still setting up their camps. Dr. Yoon So Ra watched from the monitoring station high above. She had taught xenobiology to Taemin when he first arrived at the academy. She knew how human minds worked differently from other species. Where aliens saw an impossible barrier to overcome through strength, humans saw a problem to solve with tools and creativity. "Fascinating," she said to the other instructors watching the screens. "Look how he approaches this differently." The alien instructors were confused. Most species had standard ways of dealing with challenges. Vraxians used brute force. Sorak used speed and agility. Chitauri used their natural drilling abilities. Each species had evolved specific talents for overcoming obstacles. Humans seem to have evolved the ability to see obstacles differently entirely. As the first hour passed, Taemin had climbed 20 meters while most other cadets were still preparing. The Saurak twins finally began their attempt, using their natural claws to try to find tiny imperfections in the ice. But their cold-blooded bodies were already slowing down in the freezing temperature. Yorgeth made his attempt using pure strength, trying to punch handholds into the ice. His powerful arms could dent the surface, but not enough to create reliable grips. After 10 meters, he was forced to retreat to his heated shelter. The Luminari twins discovered that their phase abilities simply did not work on this ancient ice. Whatever made the wall so hard also prevented their quantum powers from functioning properly. By the end of the first day, most cadets had made only a few attempts before retreating to their shelters. The wall had defeated initial efforts from every species except one. High above them, a small figure in a thermal suit continued his steady, methodical climb, leaving a trail of perfectly spaced handholds in the ice behind him. The second day brought worse weather. The wind howled across the ice wall like a living beast, and snow fell in thick sheets that made it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. In their heated shelters below, most of the alien cadets waited for better conditions. Velthoris and Zekmaya huddled together in their thermal tent. The Saurak twins had spent hours studying the wall through their equipment, mapping every tiny crack and imperfection they could find. Their reptilian minds worked like computers, calculating the best possible climbing route. The surface temperature has dropped another 5 degrees, Velthoris said, reading his instruments. Our body heat is already too low for safe climbing. Zekmaya nodded, her scales now completely covered in frost. We must wait for the storm to pass. Cold-blooded species cannot function in these conditions. But waiting was becoming dangerous too. Their heating units consumed power rapidly, and they only had enough battery life for another day. Soon they would have to choose between attempting the climb or calling for emergency rescue. Klaxon 9 faced different problems in her shelter. The Chitauri had tried to use her natural drilling mandibles to create handholds in the ice, but the wall was far harder than anything on her homeworld. Her mandibles, which could cut through rock and metal, barely scratched the ancient ice. She tested her equipment again, pressing her mandibles against a sample of ice she had chipped from the wall. Sparks flew, but she only managed to create tiny scrapes in the surface. The ice seemed to get harder the deeper it went, as if compressed by countless centuries of weight and cold. Yorgeth the Ursani was having the opposite problem. His massive strength could actually damage the ice, but not in useful ways. When he punched the wall, he created crater-like dents instead of handholds. His powerful claws left gouges too wide and shallow to grip safely. Strength without precision is useless here, he growled to himself in his shelter. His thick fur kept him warmer than the others, but even his hardy species had limits in this extreme cold. The Luminari twins, Shiara and Valenti, were perhaps the most frustrated of all. Their species had evolved the ability to phase through solid matter by shifting their molecular structure. On their homeworld, no barrier could stop them. But the ice wall of torment seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. I do not understand. Shiara said, her blue light flickering with confusion. The ice responds normally to physical contact, but our phase abilities cannot penetrate it. It is as if the wall exists in quantum states we cannot access, Valenti replied. This ice is not natural. It has properties that defy our understanding. They had spent hours trying different approaches. Partial phasing allowed them to stick their hands slightly into the ice, but not enough to create handholds. Full phasing simply would not work at all. The wall remained as solid to them as it was, to any purely physical being. Neftali the Aquari was in real danger. Her water-based body was slowly freezing solid despite all her heating equipment. Ice crystals formed in her transparent flesh faster than her internal systems could melt them. She had already activated her emergency beacon twice, only to cancel it at the last moment. I cannot continue, she admitted to the others over their communication system. My species was not designed for temperatures this extreme. I will have to withdraw. High above them all, barely visible through the storm, Taman continued his steady climb. The human had gained almost 60 meters, while the aliens struggled with the basic challenge of staying warm. His simple technique of melting handholds seemed immune to the problems that stopped everyone else. Dr. Yoon So-ra watched from the monitoring station with growing interest. The other instructors were starting to pay attention to the human's unusual progress. How is he maintaining his pace in this weather? Asked Instructor Morketh, a massive Vraxian with experience in Arctic warfare. Human adaptability, Dr. Yoon replied. They evolved on a world with extreme weather variations. Their bodies and minds learned to adjust to changing conditions rather than specializing for specific environments. She pointed to the screen showing Tae-min's vital signs. Look at his heart rate and body temperature. They fluctuate constantly as he adapts to each new section of the climb. Other species try to maintain steady internal conditions. Humans accept change as normal. Another instructor, the insectoid commander Velkron, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. But his equipment is so primitive. A simple thermos and basic climbing gear. How can that be superior to our advanced technology? Because it does not depend on power sources or complex mechanisms, Dr. Yoon explained. A thermos maintains heat through simple physics. It cannot break down or run out of energy. Sometimes the simplest tools are the most reliable. On the wall, Tae-min had reached a particularly difficult section. The ice here curved outward slightly, making it harder to maintain balance. But instead of retreating like the logical approach would suggest, he adapted his technique. He poured water in different patterns, creating not just handholds but small ledges where he could rest. The alien cadets below watched this through their scopes when the storm briefly cleared. What they saw challenged everything they thought. They knew about climbing. He is modifying the wall itself, Velthoris observed. This is not climbing in any traditional sense. Is he cheating? Zekmaya asked. Commander Thulvar overheard their radio conversation. The human is using available resources to overcome obstacles. This is exactly what warriors must do in real combat situations. The wall itself becomes his tool. Klaxon 9 tried to copy the human's approach. She heated water in her shelter and carried it to the wall in a container. but when she poured it on the ice, the results were different. The water froze too quickly in the extreme cold. Her insectoid body could not generate enough heat to keep the water liquid long enough to be useful. Yorgeth attempted something similar with less success. His massive paws could not control the water flow precisely enough to create proper handholds. He ended up wasting most of his heated water and creating unusable gouges in the ice. The Luminary twins tried using their natural energy to heat water, but their abilities worked by phasing energy through matter. Since they could not properly phase with the wall, their energy dissipated uselessly into the air. By the end of the second day, the gap between the human and everyone else had grown dramatically. Taman was approaching the 100-meter mark, while most aliens had barely left their shelters. The storm was getting worse, and power supplies were running low. Neftali finally activated her emergency beacon for real. The rescue shuttle arrived, within an hour, to extract the freezing Aquari cadet. As they lifted her away, she looked up at the tiny figure still climbing through the storm. "How does he do it?" she asked the rescue team. The pilot, a veteran Vraxian named Korthak, had been watching the trial for years. "I have seen many species attempt this wall," he said. "Most try to fight it with their strengths. The human seems to be having a conversation with it instead." In the monitoring station, more instructors gathered to watch the unprecedented climb. Never before had anyone maintained such steady progress through the wall's worst weather. The alien observers were beginning to realize they might be witnessing something entirely new. "Perhaps," Dr. Yoon said quietly, "we have been thinking about this trial all wrong." Taman paused at the 100-meter mark to check his supplies. His thermos was half empty, but he had planned for this. From his backpack, he pulled out several heat packs and a small camping stove. The wind tried to tear the equipment from his hands, but he worked carefully and methodically. Below him, the alien cadets looked like tiny dots in their colorful shelters. Above him, the wall continued upward into the gray sky. He had climbed higher than most aliens ever attempted, and he was not even tired yet. The human unscrewed his thermos and added hot water from his camping stove. Steam rose around him like a small cloud. He carefully packed away his equipment and resumed climbing. Pour water, wait for it to melt the ice, grip the handhold, climb higher, repeat. It looked easy from a distance, but every movement required precise timing and control. The water had to be hot enough to melt the ancient ice, but not so hot that it would burn his hands when he gripped the hold. He had to wait long enough for the hold to become safe, but not so long that it froze solid again. In the monitoring station, a crowd of instructors watched the screens showing Taemin's progress. They came from different species and had different ideas about what made a good warrior, but they all agreed on one thing. They had never seen anything like this before. "He is treating the wall like a partner instead of an enemy," observed Elder Mordian, the ancient keeper who had overseen hundreds of trials. "Most climbers fight against the ice. This human works with it." Dr. Yoon Sora nodded. She had spent years studying how different species solved problems. Human minds evolved to see patterns and possibilities rather than fixed obstacles. Where you see an impossible wall, he sees raw material that can be shaped. Commander Velcron clicked her mandibles skeptically. But surely this violates the spirit of the trial. The wall is meant to test strength and endurance, not creativity. Is it? Elder Mordian asked. The trial has existed for 3 centuries, but perhaps we never fully understood its purpose. On the wall, Taemin encountered his first real challenge. A section of ice had a strange texture, more like crystal than frozen water. When he poured hot water on it, the liquid ran off without melting anything. The surface was too smooth and hard even for his technique. Most climbers would have retreated at this point to find another route. But Taemin studied the problem differently. He noticed that the crystal ice had tiny stress lines running through it. Instead of trying to melt it, he used his camping knife to carefully tap along these lines. Small pieces of crystal ice broke away, creating rough patches he could grip. It was slower than melting handholds, but it worked. The human adapted his technique to match the materials he found. Remarkable, Dr. Yoon said, watching the screens. He is reading the wall like a book, understanding each section and responding appropriately. The alien instructors were beginning to understand that they might be witnessing a completely different approach to the trial. For 300 years, every species had attempted the wall using their natural strengths. Vraxians used brute force. Saurak used speed and agility. Chitauri used their drilling abilities. The human was using his brain. Captain Park Jun-ho arrived at the monitoring station during the 3rd day. He was the Academy's human military liaison, responsible for helping alien instructors understand human capabilities and limitations. "How is our cadet performing?" he asked, studying the screens. "See for yourself," Dr. Yoon replied, pointing to Taemin's position. The human was now at the 150-meter mark, still climbing steadily despite worsening weather conditions. Captain Park smiled. "This reminds me of stories from Earth's history. Human climbers always found ways to make the impossible possible. We have a saying, there is always another way up." But his methods seem so... Commander Velcran searched for the right word. Improvised? Unplanned? How can such chaos lead to success? "It is not chaos," Captain Park explained. "It is adaptation. Humans evolved in environments that change constantly. We learn to solve problems in real time rather than following predetermined plans." He pointed to the screen showing Taemin's equipment. "Look at his supplies. Everything has multiple uses. The thermos holds hot water but also serves as a weight for testing ice strength. The camping stove provides heat, but its metal parts can be used as tools. The heat packs warm his hands but can also be dissolved in water to extend his supply of melting liquid." The alien instructors studied the human's gear with new understanding. What they had seen as primitive equipment was actually a carefully chosen collection of versatile tools. On the wall, Taemin faced another challenge. The ice here was not solid, but made of layers that could break away suddenly. When he created a handhold, chunks of ice would sometimes fall, taking his grip with them. Instead of fighting this problem, he used it. The human began deliberately, breaking away the unstable layers to reach the solid ice beneath. It made more noise and took longer, but it created much stronger handholds. He learns from each obstacle, Elder Mordian observed. The wall teaches him, and he listens. Below, the remaining alien cadets were struggling with basic survival. Velthoris and Zekmaya had been forced to activate their emergency beacon when their heating unit failed. The rescue team found them semi-conscious from hypothermia. Klaxon 9 was having better luck, but had only managed to climb 30 meters in 3 days. Her mandibles were wearing down from repeated attempts to drill through the impossibly hard ice. She would have to retreat soon or risk permanent damage to her natural tools. Yorgeth had made it to 40 meters using pure strength and determination, but his massive body consumed energy too quickly in the extreme cold. Even his thick fur could not protect him indefinitely from the wall's freezing winds. The Luminari twins had given up trying to climb and were instead studying the wall's quantum properties. They hoped to understand why their phase abilities did not work, but they were no closer to actually ascending the ice. Only the human continued climbing. "I am beginning to think," Elder Mordian said slowly, "that we have been asking the wrong question all these years." "What do you mean?" Dr. Yoon asked. "We have always asked which species could climb the wall. Perhaps we should have been asking which species could change the wall." As if to prove his point, Tae-min reached the 200-meter mark just as the sun set on the 3rd day. He had climbed further than anyone in Academy history, and he showed no signs of slowing down. The human pulled out his camping stove again, its small flame looking impossibly brave against the vast darkness of the frozen wall. Steam rose around him as he prepared more hot water, and far below, the alien observers began to realize they were witnessing something that would change the Academy forever. The 4th day brought the worst conditions yet. The wind screamed across the ice wall with the force of a hurricane, and the temperature dropped so low that even the monitoring equipment began to malfunction. Tae-min was now at the 250-meter mark, higher than any cadet had ever climbed, but the wall seemed determined to stop him. His thermos was nearly empty, and his camping stove fuel was running low. The human had known this moment would come, but knowing and experiencing were different things. The handholds he had melted earlier were now covered in fresh ice from the storm, making them treacherous to grip. Below him, the last of the alien cadets had finally given up. Klaxon 9 activated her emergency beacon after her mandibles became too damaged to continue drilling. Yorgeth held out longer, his Ursani pride refusing to admit defeat. But eventually, hypothermia forced him to call for rescue as well. The Luminari twins were extracted after their energy levels dropped too low to maintain their physical forms. They had spent their time studying the wall instead of climbing it, but even their research had to end when the cold began affecting their quantum stability. Tae-min was alone on the wall now, the only cadet still attempting the trial. In the monitoring station, instructors from 12 different species watched his vital signs with growing concern. "His core temperature is dropping into the danger zone," reported the medical officer, a skilled Aquari healer named Neth Ara. "He should call for extraction. Humans have survived in extreme conditions before," Captain Parks said, though worry showed in his voice. "Their bodies can function at lower temperatures than most species." Dr. Yoon studied the readings more carefully. Look at his heart rate and breathing patterns. They are not random. He is using controlled hypothermia to conserve energy. On the wall, Taemin made a decision that would have seemed insane to any logical mind. Instead of rationing his remaining fuel, he used all of it at once to heat a large quantity of water. Then he did something unprecedented. He poured the hot water over himself. The alien observers gasped in shock. Covering yourself with water in sub-zero temperatures was suicide, but Taemin had calculated the risk carefully. His thermal suit would trap the hot water against his body, creating a temporary warming system. It would not last long, but it might be enough. Steam rose from the human's body as he resumed climbing. The hot water in his suit gave him perhaps 30 minutes of warmth, but it also gave him something more important: freedom to take risks. With his body temperature temporarily stable, Taemin began climbing faster than ever before. He poured his remaining hot water in larger amounts, creating bigger handholds that he could grip more securely. The technique used up his supply quickly, but it allowed him to gain height rapidly while the warmth lasted. Brilliant, Dr. Yoon breathed. He is using his own body as a heat reservoir, but even brilliant tactics had limits. When the hot water finally cooled, Taemin was at the 300-meter mark with no more fuel for his stove. His thermos was empty. The storm was getting worse, and night was falling. This was where most observers expected the human to finally admit defeat. He had climbed higher than anyone in history, but without hot water, his technique would not work. The wall above him stretched endlessly upward, smooth and unclimbable. Instead of retreating, Taemin began to adapt again. The human pulled out his emergency heat packs, the kind used by soldiers to warm their hands in cold weather. He crushed them to activate the chemical heating reaction, then pressed them against the ice. The heat packs were not designed for melting ice, but they generated enough warmth to soften small areas. It was much slower than using hot water, but it worked. Taemin created tiny handholds, barely big enough for his fingertips. The climbing became incredibly difficult, requiring perfect balance and strength, but he continued upward. "This should not be possible," Commander Velcran said, watching the screens in disbelief. "Those heat packs generate minimal temperature. How can they affect ice this hard?" Captain Park smiled grimly. "He is not just using the heat. Watch his hands." The observers looked more carefully at the close-up cameras. Taemin was not simply pressing the heat packs against the ice and waiting. He was moving them in rapid circular motions, using friction to multiply the warming effect. The combination of chemical heat and mechanical friction was just enough to soften the ancient ice. But even this technique had limits. Heat packs were designed for single use, and Taemin only had a limited supply. Worse, the intense cold was, making his hands clumsy and slow. Frostbite was becoming a real danger. At the 350-meter mark, the human's heat packs ran out. The monitoring station fell silent as they watched Taemin hang motionless on the wall. His body heat was dangerously low. His equipment was exhausted, and 400 meters of smooth ice still stretched above him. This had to be the end. Instead, Taemin did something that made the alien observers question everything they thought. They knew about the limits of determination. The human began generating heat with his own body. He started with rapid hand movements, rubbing his palms together and then pressing them against the ice. The friction warmed his hands slightly, and the warmth transferred to the wall. It was incredibly inefficient, requiring enormous energy to create tiny amounts of melting, but it worked. When his hands became too cold to continue, he used his feet. When his feet became numb, he pressed his face against the ice and used his breath to create small pockets of warmth. Every part of his body became a tool for generating the heat he needed to continue climbing. "This is madness," whispered Commander Velcran. "He will freeze to death." "Or he will succeed," Elder Mordian said quietly. "I have never seen determination like this." The human's progress slowed to less than 1 meter per hour, but it never stopped. Each handhold required minutes of careful work, warming the ice, with body heat and friction until it was soft enough to grip. His fingers were blue with cold, and ice formed in his hair and eyebrows, but he continued climbing. In the monitoring station, the medical officer watched his vital signs with growing alarm. His body is shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature. He should be unconscious by now. Human willpower is stronger than their physiology, Captain Park explained. When they decide something must be done, their minds can override their body's survival instincts. Dr. Yoon shook her head in amazement. He has turned himself into a climbing machine. Every breath, every heartbeat, every movement serves the purpose of going higher. As dawn broke on the 5th day, Taemin reached the 400-meter mark. He had been climbing for over 90 hours with almost no rest, using his own body heat to melt handholds in ice harder than diamond. The alien observers were witnessing something that challenged their understanding of what was physically possible. But the hardest part of the wall still lay ahead. The Academy's highest-ranking officials gathered in the monitoring station as news of the unprecedented climb spread throughout the galaxy. Admiral Choi Min-sik, the human fleet commander, had arrived on the first available transport. Beside him stood General Krextar of the Vraxian High Command and Chancellor Yilmoth of the Galactic Council. "This is unprecedented," Chancellor Yilmoth said, her tentacles writhing with agitation as she studied the screens. "No cadet has ever climbed above 300 meters. This human is approaching 450 meters. On the main display, Taemin hung from the wall like a tiny dark spot against the endless ice. His body temperature readings were so low that most species would have died hours ago, yet he continued his methodical climb. Every movement was calculated and precise, as if he had become part of the wall itself. The question, General Krextar rumbled, is whether this constitutes a legitimate completion of the trial or a fundamental violation of its principles. The debate had been raging for hours among the instructors. Some argued that Taiman's approach was brilliant innovation that revealed the true nature of the test. Others claimed that by modifying the wall instead of overcoming it through strength and endurance, he was essentially cheating. Commander Thulvar stood before the assembled officials, his forearms gesturing as he spoke. The human has not violated a single rule. He carries only basic equipment. He uses no advanced technology. He has not called for assistance or used energy weapons. But he is changing the fundamental nature of the challenge, protested Instructor Velcron. The Wall of Torment has tested warriors for 3 centuries. It is meant to be climbed through strength, determination, and endurance. This human melts his way up like a worm boring through wood. Elder Mordian raised one ancient hand for silence. The keeper was older than anyone in the room, and his words carried weight across all species. I have overseen this trial longer than any of you have been alive. I have seen the strongest warriors fail, and the most determined cadets retreat, in defeat. But I have never seen anything like this. He gestured to the screen showing Taemin's slow but steady progress. This human is not cheating. He is revealing something we never understood about the trial itself. Dr. Yoon So-ra stepped forward. As the Academy's leading expert on human behavior, her analysis would be crucial to the decision. Members of the Council, the Wall of Torment, was created by an ancient civilization whose records we barely understand. We know it was meant to test something, but we may have been wrong about what that something was. She activated a holographic display showing the wall's structure. This ice is not natural. It has properties that resist conventional climbing techniques from every known species. Vraxian strength cannot break it. Saurak speed cannot navigate it. Chitari drilling cannot penetrate it. Luminary phasing cannot bypass it. Admiral Choi nodded approvingly. The wall defeats specialized approaches. It requires adaptation. Exactly, Dr. Yoon continued. Human evolution produced a species with no single overwhelming strength, but with the ability to adapt to any environment. Where other species see an impossible barrier, humans see a problem to be solved. Captain Park Joon-ho added his perspective from years of military experience. On Earth, humans have climbed mountains that seemed impossible, crossed oceans that appeared uncrossable, and survived in environments that should have killed them. They do not accept that something cannot be done. The debate was interrupted by excited voices from the monitoring technicians. On the wall, Taemin had reached the most challenging section yet, an overhang where the ice curved outward, defying gravity. Previous climbers had never gotten this high, but theoretical analysis suggested this section was completely unclimbable. How can he possibly overcome this? Chancellor Yilmoth asked. There is no way to grip an upside-down surface. The answer came as they watched. Taemin pulled out his emergency climbing gear, simple metal spikes, and a small hatchet. Instead of trying to melt the overhang, he began driving the spikes directly into the ice with careful, measured hammer blows. He is attacking the wall directly, General Krextar observed. No melting, no tricks. Pure force applied with precision. Each spike took dozens of blows to drive deep enough to hold his weight. The work was exhausting, and Taemin's already low body temperature dropped further with each exertion. But slowly, spike by spike, he began to work his way across the impossible overhang. This is what I mean, Elder Mordian said quietly. He adapts his technique to match each new challenge. Melting for vertical sections, friction for crystal. Areas, direct force for overhangs. The wall itself teaches him what methods to use. The medical officer, Nethara, spoke up with concern. His vital signs are critical. Core temperature is at dangerous levels, and his fine motor control is deteriorating. He may not survive much longer regardless of his climbing ability. Admiral Choi studied the readings grimly. How much higher does he need to go? 50 meters. To the summit, came the reply. But this overhang section extends for at least 20 meters horizontally before he can climb vertically again. The room fell silent as they watched Tae-min's agonizingly slow progress across the overhang. Each spike placement required careful planning and enormous effort. His movements were becoming less coordinated as hypothermia affected his nervous system. "We should order his extraction," Chancellor Yilmoth said. "This has gone beyond a training. Exercise. The cadet will die if we do not intervene." "No," Admiral Choi said firmly. "That decision belongs to him alone. Human military doctrine does not permit commanders to order retreat unless the mission itself becomes impossible." "But this is not a real mission," General Krextar pointed out. "It is a training trial." Captain Park shook his head. "To him, there is no difference. Humans do not accept partial success when complete success remains possible." On the wall, Tae-min had reached the halfway point of the overhang. His progress was measured in centimeters now, each spike requiring multiple attempts as his coordination failed. Ice formed on his eyebrows and his breathing came in short, painful gasps. But he had not stopped. "I begin to understand," Elder Mordian said slowly, "why this trial has waited 3 centuries for the right climber. It was not meant for species with single great strengths. It was meant for a species that could become whatever the wall required." Dr. Yoon nodded. "The wall is not a test of what you can do. It is a test of what you can become." As if responding to their words, Tae-min reached the end of the overhang and began the final vertical ascent toward the summit. His movements were barely recognizable as climbing anymore, more like a slow-motion collapse upward. But still, he climbed. "Win or lose," Admiral Choi said, "this changes everything we thought we knew about the limits of determination." In the monitoring station, representatives of 12 species watched a single human redefine what they thought was possible. The Wall of Torment had found its match not in strength or speed or natural abilities, but in the uniquely human refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The summit was 30 meters away. 30 meters had never seemed so impossible. Tae-min hung from his last spike, his body screaming with exhaustion and cold. Every muscle ached. Every breath felt like ice in his lungs, and his hands were so numb he could barely feel the metal, tools he gripped. The final section of the wall rose above him like a cruel joke. After surviving the overhang that should have been impossible, he now faced ice so smooth and perfect it looked like black glass. No cracks, no imperfections, no way to create handholds with the tiny amount of body heat he had left. In the monitoring station, the medical readings painted a grim picture. Tae-min's core body temperature had dropped to levels that would kill most species outright. His heart rate was erratic, his breathing shallow, and his brain activity showed signs that hypothermia was affecting his judgment. He cannot continue, Nathara said, her aquatic features twisted with concern. His body is shutting down. We must extract him immediately. Admiral Choi studied the screens with the cold calculation of a military commander who had sent soldiers into impossible situations. What are his chances of reaching the summit? Dr. Yoon ran calculations on her tablet. With conventional climbing techniques? 0. The wall surface offers no grip points, and he lacks the body heat necessary to melt sufficient handholds. But this is not a conventional climber, Captain Park observed. He has adapted to every challenge so far. On the wall, Tae-min made a decision that defied both logic and sanity. Instead of using his remaining energy to create a few small handholds, he used all his emergency spikes at once. Driving them into the ice in a straight vertical line, he created a ladder of metal rungs extending upward. The work nearly killed him. Each spike required dozens of hammer blows, and his coordination was so poor that many strikes missed entirely. His hands split open from gripping the tools, and blood froze on the ice around him. But slowly, agonizingly, he built his ladder upward. Incredible, Elder Mordian whispered. He is not just climbing the wall anymore. He is building a monument to human determination. But even this desperate plan had limits. Tae-min had only 12 spikes, which would carry him perhaps 15 meters up the final section. The remaining distance would still be impossible to climb without handholds. As he drove in his final spike, exhaustion overwhelmed him. The human hung motionless for long minutes, his body temperature dropping toward the point of no return. In the monitoring station, medical alarms sounded as his vital signs approached critical levels. "That is enough," Chancellor Yilmoth declared. "Order! Immediate extraction!" "Wait," Dr. Yoon said, studying her screens intently. "Look at his positioning." The others looked more carefully at Taemin's location on the wall. He had not driven the spikes randomly. Each one was placed with mathematical precision, creating the most efficient climbing route possible. More importantly, his final position put him directly below a section of ice that looked slightly different from the rest. "What is he seeing that we cannot?" Admiral Choi asked. The answer came as Tae-min began moving again. Instead of trying to climb higher, he swung his body sideways, using his climbing axe to chip at the ice beside him. Small fragments broke away, revealing something hidden beneath. A vein of softer ice that ran diagonally up the wall. The ancient builders left a path, Elder Mordian realized. Hidden beneath the surface ice, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Tae-min could not have known about the hidden vein, but his systematic approach to the wall had brought him to exactly the right position to discover it. The softer ice could be chipped away with his axe, creating rough but usable handholds. His progress became even slower than before. Each handhold required careful chipping with his increasingly clumsy movements. The axe slipped from his numb fingers repeatedly, forcing him to catch it before it fell into the abyss below. Blood from his split hands made the tool slippery and dangerous to grip, but he continued climbing. "His body temperature has stabilized," Nethera reported with amazement. "It is still dangerously low, but the physical activity is generating just enough heat to prevent total system shutdown." "He found the balance point," Captain Park said admiringly. "Working hard enough to stay warm, but not so hard that he exhausts himself completely." 10 meters from the summit, Taemin's axe finally broke. The metal head snapped off from repeated impacts against the ancient ice, leaving him with only the wooden handle. Most climbers would have seen this as the end of any hope of success. The human used the broken handle as a lever, wedging it into cracks in the softer ice and using his body weight to pry out chunks large enough to create handholds. It was brutally inefficient, requiring enormous effort for tiny gains, but it worked. 5 meters from the summit, the vein of soft ice ran out. Taemin hung from his last handhold, staring up at the final section of smooth, unclimbable ice. He had no tools left, no heat sources, no tricks or innovations remaining. His body was shutting down from cold and exhaustion. By every measure of logic and possibility, he had reached the absolute limit of what could be achieved. In the monitoring station, even his supporters began to accept that this was the end. The human had climbed higher than anyone in history, had redefined what was considered possible, but the wall had finally defeated him. Instead of retreating or calling for extraction, Taemin did something that none of the observers expected. He began to laugh. The sound came through the communication system as a weak, breathless chuckle that grew stronger as he studied the final section of wall. The alien observers were baffled. Hypothermia could cause delirium, but this seemed different. "What does he find amusing about failure?" General Krextar asked. Dr. Yoon listened to the laughter and understood. "He is not amused by failure. He is amused by the solution." On the wall, Taemin had realized something that changed everything. The final 5 meters of ice were not actually part of the original wall. They were build-up from centuries of storm and weather, a coating of natural ice over the ancient structure. And natural ice, unlike the mysterious ancient material, could be affected by simple chemistry. The human pulled out his emergency medical kit and found what he was looking for: chemical heating pads designed to treat hypothermia. But instead of using them to warm his body, he crushed them and mixed the contents with snow, creating a crude but effective ice-melting compound. He painted the mixture onto the wall above him and waited. Slowly, incredibly, the natural ice began to dissolve, revealing handholds carved into the ancient structure beneath. The original builders had included a final ladder to the summit, hidden for centuries under accumulated ice. "Impossible," breathed Commander Velcran. "How could he know to try that?" "Because," Elder Mordian said with growing wonder, "he never stopped thinking. Even in the grip of hypothermia, even facing certain defeat, the human mind continued to analyze and adapt." Taemin climbed the revealed handholds with the last of his strength. His movements were barely controlled falls upward, but each one brought him closer to the summit that had seemed impossible just minutes before. 3 meters, 2 meters, 1 meter. The summit of the Wall of Torment lay just within reach. Instructor Kim Da-un stood at the summit monitoring station, watching her instruments with growing amazement. She had been stationed at the top of the Wall of Torment for 3 years, and in all that time, Only a handful of cadets had even attempted to climb this high. Most gave up long before reaching the final sections. Now, for the first time in her career, someone was actually approaching the summit. "Confirmed visual contact," she reported into her communication device. "The human cadet is 20 meters, below my position and still climbing." Through her binoculars, she could see Tae-min moving up the ancient handholds with mechanical precision. His movements were slow and unsteady, like someone moving underwater, but they never stopped. Each grip was carefully tested, each step deliberate and calculated. "His vital signs are beyond critical," came Nathara's voice through the comm. "I do not understand how he is still conscious, let alone climbing." Kim Da-eun had spent years studying the final approach to the summit. The handholds carved into the ancient structure were perfectly spaced and angled, as if designed by master engineers who understood exactly how exhausted climbers would be when they reached this point. "The original builders knew," she murmured, to herself. "They expected climbers to reach this state. The handholds are designed for someone operating at the absolute limit of human endurance." But who were the original builders? The civilization that created the Wall of Torment had vanished millennia ago, leaving behind only this single mysterious structure. Their records were lost, their purpose unknown. The galaxy's greatest archaeologists had studied the wall for centuries without understanding its true meaning. 10 meters below, Tae-min paused to rest. Through her binoculars, Kim Da-eun could see his face clearly for the first time. His skin was blue-white with cold, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, and ice crystals covered his eyebrows and hair. He looked more dead than alive, but his eyes were still alert, still calculating. Even in the grip of hypothermia, the human mind continued to function. "Extraordinary," she reported. "He shows no signs of giving up despite obvious physical distress." In the monitoring station far below, the assembled officials watched the final approach with tense silence. Admiral Choi's hands were clenched into fists, though his face remained calm. Dr. Yoon muttered calculations under her breath, trying to understand how the human body could continue functioning under these conditions. "His brain activity is fascinating," she said, studying the medical readings. "Most of his higher functions have shut down to conserve energy, but the areas controlling problem-solving and spatial reasoning remain fully active." Elder Mordian nodded slowly. "The wall has stripped away everything except pure determination and intelligence. What we see now is the human spirit in its most basic form." 5 meters from the summit, Tae-min encountered his final challenge. One of the ancient handholds had broken away over the centuries, leaving a gap too wide to cross with normal climbing techniques. The missing hold was positioned at a crucial point where climbers needed to transition from the vertical wall to the final slope leading to the summit platform. A logical mind would have seen this as impossible. The gap required a reach that exceeded human physical capabilities, and Tae-min lacked the strength for any kind of dynamic movement. But the human had stopped thinking logically hours ago. Instead of trying to bridge the gap with his arms, he used his entire body as a tool. Wedging his feet into the lower handholds, he leaned backward until he was nearly horizontal, then swung his body upward like a pendulum. At the peak of his swing, he grabbed for the handhold beyond the gap. Missed on the first attempt, nearly falling before catching himself on his starting holds. The second attempt also failed, and the third. Each failure cost him energy he could not afford to lose. On the fourth attempt, his fingertips just barely caught the edge of the target hold. Impossible, Kim Da-un whispered, watching through her binoculars. The reach should be beyond human physical limits. But Tae-min had discovered something the wall's designers understood. Human desperation could push the body beyond its normal limitations. Fueled by determination rather than strength, he pulled himself up to the final handhold and began the last few meters to the summit. Kim Da-un activated the summit beacon, sending a signal throughout the academy that a cadet was approaching. Completion of the trial. In 300 years, this beacon had been used only 7 times, and never by someone in Tae-min's condition. Time elapsed. 31 hours, 14 minutes, she reported. This will be a new academy record. The final slope was not technically difficult, but for someone in Tae-min's condition, each step was a monumental effort. His legs shook with exhaustion, his breathing came in ragged gasps, and his vision was blurred from hypothermia. But he could see the summit platform now carved from the same ancient material as the wall itself. Strange symbols covered its surface, worn smooth by centuries of weather but still visible. The platform was empty except for a simple metal plaque marking the official end point of the trial. 3 steps, 2 steps, 1 step. Tae-min collapsed onto the summit platform, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. He had done it. After 31 hours of climbing, he had reached the top of the wall of torment. Kim Da-un rushed to his side with emergency medical equipment. "Human cadet, can you hear me? You have successfully completed the trial." Tae-min opened his eyes and looked around the summit platform. Through his blurred vision, he could see the ancient symbols carved into the stone. They seemed familiar, somehow, though he had never seen them before. The symbols, he whispered through numb lips. They look like... Kim Da-un followed his gaze to the carved markings. She had seen them thousands of times during her years at the summit, but had never paid them much attention. Now, looking at them through the eyes of someone who had just completed an impossible climb, she saw them differently. The symbols were not random decorations. They were diagrams, instructions, a guide showing different techniques for overcoming vertical obstacles. "They are climbing instructions," she breathed. The ancient builders left a manual for future climbers. As the medical team arrived to stabilize Tae-min, Kim Da-un studied the symbols more carefully. There were diagrams showing how to create handholds in different types of ice, illustrations of body positions for crossing overhangs, and detailed instructions for using simple tools to overcome impossible obstacles. "This changes everything," she reported to the monitoring station. The wall was not just a test, it was a teaching tool. The ancient civilization was trying to pass on knowledge about overcoming impossible challenges. In the monitoring station, below, Elder Mordian smiled with ancient wisdom. And now we know why it took 300 years to find the right student. The wall was waiting for someone who would learn its lessons instead of simply trying to defeat it. As Tai Min was stabilized and prepared for transport, he managed one final look at the ancient symbols. Even in his exhausted state, he could see the patterns they described. Techniques for turning obstacles into tools, methods for adapting to impossible conditions, the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had mastered the art of never giving up. The Wall of Torment had finally revealed its secret, and it had taken a human to unlock it. 6 months after Taemin's historic climb, the Galactic Military Academy had transformed completely. The Wall of Torment still stood as imposing as ever, but everything about how cadets approached it had changed. Admiral Choi Min-sik stood in the renovated briefing hall addressing a new class of cadets from 15 different species. Behind him, holographic displays showed the ancient symbols discovered at the summit, now translated and understood as the most comprehensive survival manual ever found. The wall teaches us that there is always another way, the Admiral said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. When strength fails, use intelligence. When tools break, improvise new ones. When the impossible blocks your path, find a way to make it possible. In the front row sat Tae Min, now recovered from his ordeal and promoted to assistant instructor. His hands still bore scars from the climb, and his eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had pushed beyond every limit and discovered there were no real limits at all. The new training protocols reflected everything learned from his achievement. Cadets now learned to see obstacles as raw materials rather than barriers. They studied improvisation as seriously as weapons training. Most importantly, they learned that the greatest tool any warrior could possess was the refusal to accept defeat. The ancient builders understood something we had forgotten. Admiral Choi continued, "Victory is not about being stronger than your enemy. It is about being more adaptable." Dr. Yoon So-ra had spent months analyzing the summit symbols with teams of archaeologists and linguists. Their translation revealed that the vanished civilization had faced extinction from climate catastrophe on their home world. The Wall of Torment was their attempt to pass on the mental tools necessary for survival in impossible conditions. They knew their knowledge would die with them, she explained to the cadets. So they created a test that would only reveal its secrets to someone who truly understood adaptation and persistence. The wall itself had been modified based on their discoveries. The original handholds were cleared and marked, creating a safer route for cadets who demonstrated sufficient skill and determination. But the wall also retained its deadly challenges for those who approached it with old thinking. Captain Park Jun-ho now led expeditions to the wall 3 times per week, teaching mixed groups of human and alien cadets the techniques Tai Min had pioneered. The results were remarkable. Cadets who would never have attempted the climb before were now reaching heights that had seemed impossible. The key, Captain Park explained to his current group, is to work with the wall instead of fighting against it. Every obstacle contains the materials for its own solution. Among his students was Velthoris, one of the Saurak twins who had failed in the original trial. The reptilian cadet had requested permission to attempt the wall again, using human-inspired techniques adapted for his species' capabilities. "I understand now," Velthoris said, studying the ice face through new eyes. "I was trying to climb, as a Sorak should climb. But the wall requires me to climb as the wall demands." His second attempt was completely different from his first. Where he had previously relied on speed and natural agility, he now used careful planning and constant adaptation. When his claws could not grip the smooth ice, he used heated water like Taemin had done. When the water ran out, he found other ways to create friction and purchase points. Velthoris reached the 200-meter mark before exhaustion forced his retreat, but he had proven the point. The techniques were not uniquely human. They were universally applicable principles that any species could learn. Elder Mordian oversaw these changes with deep satisfaction. In his centuries of service to the Academy, he had never seen such a transformation in how young warriors thought about challenges. The human showed us that the wall was never meant to be defeated, he told the assembled instructors. It was meant to be understood. The discovery had implications far beyond the Academy. Throughout the galaxy, military units began adopting human-inspired training methods. The rigid specialization that had characterized most species' military doctrine gave way to more flexible approaches that emphasized adaptation and creative problem-solving. General Krextar, initially skeptical of human methods, had become one of their strongest advocates after seeing the results. "My Vraxian warriors were trained to overcome obstacles through strength," he admitted to Admiral Choi. "Your humans taught them to overcome obstacles through intelligence. The combination makes them unstoppable." The Wall of Torment's completion times reflected the new understanding. Where previous climbs had taken 40 to 60 hours properly, trained cadets now reached the summit in 20 to 30 hours. More importantly, the survival rate had increased dramatically as climbers learned to read the wall's conditions and adapt their techniques accordingly. Taemin often returned to the wall to guide new attempts. His insights into the ice conditions and hidden routes had saved dozens of lives and prevented countless injuries. But his most important contribution was the mindset he taught. "The wall will try to convince you that something is impossible," he told each new group of climbers. "When that happens, remember that impossible just means you have not found the right approach yet." Instructor Kim Da-un had documented over 200 successful summit attempts in the months following the discovery. Each climber added to their understanding of the wall's challenges and solutions. The ancient manual grew richer with each expedition. "We are building on the foundation the ancient builders created," she reported to the Academy Council. "Every climb teaches us something new about pushing beyond perceived limits." The cultural impact extended beyond military training. Throughout the galaxy, the phrase, "find another way up," became synonymous with human-inspired persistence. Children learned stories about the cadet who refused to accept the impossible. Artists created works celebrating the triumph of adaptation over strength. But perhaps the most important change was in how the different species viewed each other. The rigid hierarchy based on natural abilities gave way to recognition that every species contributed unique perspectives to solving challenges. The wall taught us humility, Chancellor Yilmoth admitted in her address to the Galactic Council. We thought we understood the nature of strength. The humans showed us we understood only a fraction of what was possible. Admiral Choi concluded his address to the new cadets by pointing to the wall visible through the briefing hall's windows. Out there stands proof that there are no impossible challenges, only insufficient creativity. The wall of torment stands ready to teach anyone willing to learn. As the cadets dispersed to begin their training, Tae-min remained behind to study the wall one more time. 6 months later, it still impressed him with its size and apparent impossibility. But now he saw it differently. It was not a barrier to be overcome. It was a teacher waiting to share the wisdom of a vanished civilization. It was a testament to the idea that with enough determination and creativity, any obstacle could become a stepping stone to something greater. The Wall of Torment had found its purpose at last, and the galaxy would never be the same.